Good morning, afternoon, and evening. Bienvenue à toutes et à tous. I am Matthew Smith, a Senior Program Specialist at Canada's International Development Research Centre, aka the IDRC, and I will be your host for this Artificial Intelligence for Development soft launch event, Driving Inclusive Innovation Using AI in Africa. First things first, I would like to make sure that everyone has selected the language of their choice. We are pleased to have simultaneous translation of the event in 5 languages. That's Swahili, French, English, Arabic, and Portuguese. And you'll notice a box in the lower left-hand, somewhere down there, hopefully, of your screen, and there you can select your preferred language. If you select the floor option, this lets you listen to the original audio of the person who is speaking. Of course, you can change the language you're listening to at any time during the webinar. Nous sommes fiers de disposer d'une traduction simultanée en 5 langues, dont le Swahili, le français, l'anglais, l'arabe et...
We have simultaneous interpretation in 5 languages, French, English, Portuguese, Arabic, and Swahili. You will see a little box in the bottom left, and you can choose your favorite language. If you choose floor, you will hear the original audio of the person speaking. Please note that you can change language at any point during the webinar.
Has now selected the language of your choice, and we can move on to celebrate the launch of the AI4D partnership between the Swedish International Development Agency and the IDRC. We have a packed, to celebrate this new partnership, we have a packed agenda today. We'll be hearing from panelists from all over Africa and beyond, whose expertise includes machine learning, human rights law, gender, and AI policy. We're also going to talk about how the AI4D program came to be and how the initiative has responded to the COVID-19 pandemic. I expect everyone to leave this webinar a little bit smarter than they were before, particularly in terms of understanding the very cool ways people are working to combat bias and make AI more inclusive around the world. Hopefully you can take some of this new knowledge and apply it in the important work that you do. And now, without any further ado, I'm honored to be able to introduce our first pair of speakers, Karen Jompton, CEDA's Director General, and Jean Lebel, the President of IDRC. Over to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew, and good day, Karen. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you in the cyberspace. I'm in Ottawa. Karen, I suspect that you are, where are you located right now?
I'm in Stockholm, in Sweden, the capital of Sweden.
Great to see you, Karen. So, and hello, everyone, and welcome. On behalf of the International Development Research Center, we are thrilled to see the launch of the AI4D partnership, including AI4D Africa and the Global South AI for COVID program. The Artificial Intelligence for Development Africa is dedicated to a future where artificial intelligence empowers Africans to have a more inclusive, prosperous, and sustainable future. The Global South AI for COVID, on the other side, program will harness artificial intelligence to strengthen healthcare system and support response and recovery at the face of the current pandemic. Karen, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. And thank you to CEDA, Swedish CEDA, for being such a strong partner in this 4-year initiative, which came about through mutual interest in artificial intelligence between our 2 organizations. But I think it's also based on a long tradition of collaboration between IDRC and CEDA and friendship between our country. Thanks for being with us this morning. I will make my speech and my introduction in English. Si vous voulez parler français, il n'y a pas de problème. And as Matt has pointed out,
if you want to speak French, no problem.
Official language of Canada, as well as Arabic, Portuguese, and Swahili. Now to the point. IDRC has a long history of investing in digital inclusion in Global South, including a wide range of innovative programming that serve as the building blocks for us to support the transformative potential of artificial intelligence. In fact, we were one of the first organizations to support a shared research agenda for AI and human development, which is presented in a white paper available on IDRC website. And this white paper, no surprise to you, was put together by Matthew Smith, that is our host, together with his colleague. This initiative today represents the realization of a co-created vision for the role artificial intelligence can play in sustainable development. And we are deeply committed, all at IDRC, to this partnership and to continuing to collaborate with communities and actors to build a shared agenda for AI across Africa. We are here to support the buildup of a platform for Africans to speak on artificial intelligence and to have the keynotes in various forums to bring their perspective in this domain. I'm told this is the biggest initiative of its kind for Africa so far, and we are pleased to be coordinating with other key actors such as GIZ and the Mozilla Foundation to advance this work. So, Karen, I outlined a little bit of our motivation at IDRC, but we are partner in crimes over here. So what is the motivation for investing for AI for development? And it's a nice crime, by the way.
It's a very nice crime. Thank you, Sean, for this introduction, and thank you for the cooperation. Thank you, IDRC, for partnering in this extremely important endeavor and this initiative. Why are we investing in this AI for development? Yeah, there are, of course, many reasons, but the main reason is young innovators were telling us loud and clear that they needed support to enable them to pursue work on artificial intelligence. Thus, it's a demand-driven response to what we were hearing on the ground from those who will be leading this work. Because we are actually co-working on this in many senses. The demand-driven approach is reflected on how this initiative came into existence. It was shaped and co-created with practitioners across Africa, for instance, through workshops in Kenya and Côte d'Ivoire. This initiative has been designed to create the meaning. The purpose of it is to create a diverse array of opportunities, including for established and emerging leaders within AI, through all the way to graduate and high school students. The goal is to advance efforts to leverage artificial intelligence for meaningful good. Maybe unnecessary to say, but always good to remember. This is the demand we are seeing from researchers, but there is an equal demand from governments and businesses to support AI innovations that contribute to persistent development challenges. This initiative, we are hoping, will promote excellence in applied research, applying AI technologies in the service of solving development challenges and improving livelihoods for those living in poverty in all its different dimensions. Initial focus will be on climate change, education, agriculture, and gender. Some of these areas we will get back to, as well as augmenting pandemic preparedness. While AI is likely to be a transformative technology in advancing the Sustainable Development Goals, we risk causing harm by these technologies if we don't take a responsible approach that is rights-based, inclusive, ethical, and sustainable in all dimensions. It is thus a balance of opportunities, and it is with this balance of opportunities and risks in mind that the AI4D initiative will support three broad areas of work. One, supporting the policies and regulations that ensure that AI respects rights and promotes inclusion. That was also pointed out before by you, Sean, and also by Matthew. Two, supporting current and future leaders in AI and ensuring they have access to infrastructure and technology. And thirdly, advancing innovative AI applications. I could, of course, go on. There are many reasons, as I said, but Sean, there has been a lot of research on artificial intelligence as a general purpose technology and for applications in high-income regions. But what is the state of research on artificial intelligence, especially within the African context?
Thank you, Karen. It's quite remarkable. You know, a few years ago, with the team at IDRC, I've asked for a mapping of the capacity, and I was astonished to see that across Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America, there are hundreds of startups, university teams, social sector organization, accelerators, and investors working on artificial intelligence. And on IDRC website, I think we can still see this map, which is probably out of date by now, but was quite impressive. So the demand is already there. And we need to make sure that Africa and other regions are equally able to benefit from opportunities and mitigate the risk. How we approach artificial intelligence is directly linked to sustainable development, as you were pointing. And research published by Nature suggests that artificial intelligence can enable the achievement of 134 targets across the SDGs, but it's also risk inhibiting 59 of these targets. For instance, artificial intelligence can help meet targets related to poverty, education, and sustainable cities. On the flip side, examples of risk include the use of big data and AI to damage social cohesion, democratic principles, and human rights. One of the ways we can mitigate risk is to ensure that the rapid pace of AI advancement is paired with appropriate regulatory oversight and citizen understanding. Specific to Africa, the core of what we want to accomplish with research community is to ensure Africans are developing, using, and innovating technologies and data for their own regions and community, rather than relying on imported tools and concepts. I have a couple of examples too. One in agriculture, tomato, a major crop of income for many farmers in Africa, men and women. But this crop can be jeopardized by a number of pests. One of them is the moth, Tuta absoluta. I like Tuta absoluta, but you know it's commonly known as the tomato leaf miner. Using computer vision, farmers can, for instance, with a simple phone, take pictures of a leaf, and the algorithm can assess disease pattern to make a very accurate disease prediction. By linking it to an app, farmer can then receive treatment advice. And on the other side of the ledger, the aggregated data can help policymakers, agricultural support workers, and researchers to predict and prevent disease and provide targeted support. My second example, more on the social side, is in Burkina Faso, where 80% of people speak local languages. This limits the access to government services and more. But machine learning and translation are supporting inclusive services and accessibility in diverse languages, thereby helping to preserve those languages and important cultural heritage and identity. You and I think, Karen, want to ensure that those affected by an issue are the ones developing the solution, that they are part of this solution. And this initiative is a great example of that approach. It's not only you and I, it's all of us together, the audience as well, staff in our organization. We hope to see African leaders and innovation influencing the AI dialogue at the global level. And to influence global level, there's multiple dimensions, as you were mentioning. And in this one, there is feminist artificial intelligence, Karen. And I'd like you, if you could tell us a little bit more about gender and inclusion when it comes to AI.
Thank you, Sean. And from a human rights perspective, but also from an inclusion perspective, AI is vital to support gender equality and the possibility for women to take a step forward in different ways. But as we all know, there are gaps in society. There is a gender gap, there's a digital gender gap, but there are also many other gender gaps. And there is a risk that AI could amplify gender inequalities, such as, for example, access to finance. So we are excited to support an innovative network that explores both AI and gender issues in a systematic way. One of the 4 innovation networks will focus specifically on gender and inclusion to promote the achievement of SDG 5, which is gender equality, as well as through addressing persistent barriers to equality and inclusion. The network will also seek innovations that address the challenge of potential gender and other biases within machine learning algorithms themselves. Extremely interesting, I must say, if I can put a personal touch on this. But Juan, we are interested. I think that both of us are interested in all of this, but I would like to put another question to you. The planning for this initiative began well before the COVID-19 pandemic. How does AI fit into the COVID-19 context?
Well, I think that the COVID has revealed that artificial intelligence is present through the response across the world. And we are helping countries to use AI to detect COVID-19, slow its spread, optimize the response of health system, and recover from the pandemic. One example, AI and data science are crucial to the public health response to COVID. To track its evolution, to produce the timely and accurate data necessary to improve detection and response, and to help avoid overloading health system, situation that we are facing in both of our country, but globally across the world. We are currently funding projects, 6 in Africa, 2 in Latin America, and 1 in Asia, that are creating dashboards, predicting outbreaks, helping to reduce risk for vulnerable patients living with other diseases such as TB and HIV. They are also assessing the effectiveness of public health measures on both COVID-19 and on other socioeconomic criteria. Together, since the beginning of this pandemic, we invested more than $12 million in the use of AI and data science to combat COVID, improve public health system, and strengthen future disease response. And we're quite proud to be co-investing with UCARE in this innovative programming, which we hope will support both rapid response and stronger public health initiatives. But, COVID-19 is a situation in time. We are also facing other situations where AI can make a difference and should not be forgotten in this pandemic time. And can you talk to us about the intersection of AI and climate change, Karim, as you have pointed earlier in your remark that this is a domain that is quite important for us?
Thank you. Yeah, AI has a big role to play in supporting climate change mitigation as well as adaptation. On mitigation, we are already seeing novel techniques that are helping to make more efficient use of energy. AI is supporting better roads and transport planning by detecting high emissions of black carbon, for example. On adaptation, there are a range of applications. One example, helping to manage water usage so farmers can do more environmentally friendly agriculture. This potential will be realized through a combination of increased local AI capacity, strengthened policies, governance, and innovations. But Juan, AI systems are only as strong as the data on which they are based. How is the data issue being addressed?
Well, thanks, Karin. We are covering a lot of ground in this ouverture of this panel. And I don't think that we would be true if we would not say that, the number one limitation for AI innovation in Africa is data. According not only to assessment that has been made by our organization, but also to the academic communities on the continent. It runs from birth through death, from civil registration to statistical system, dealing from everything from procurement to justice. As will be explored during our panel, weak data systems amplify a wide range of challenges, including gender biases. We see this, for instance, with COVID-19 supports that government are putting in place. When people are missing from registries, they are unable to access payment and other form of support. In Africa, few countries are reliably reporting on sex disaggregated data related to COVID, which makes it even more difficult to build reliable models to predict patient outcomes, even more difficult. Biases and missing data can lead to bad or harmful prediction, which risks perpetuating and amplifying inequalities. For example, let's take access to finance. If women have historically lacked access to loans, they don't show up in the data. If a bank or microcredit provider uses an algorithm that assesses historical data about who pays back their loan on time and who doesn't, that system may assess women to be higher risk candidates because they haven't previously received credit. We must address data gap now when systems are being established and scaled before systems become entrenched. And that's quite important for all of us. And what is also very important for us, Karen, I think, is the fact that we did not plant the seeds of AI in Africa. It was grown locally through local ownership. We're just helping bring a bit of water. My background is in natural science. So we're bringing water to those seeds. And talk to us about the local ownership and why it's so fundamental to us in closing, Karen.
Thank you. I have a very short answer to that. Local ownership is the key component of this initiative, of any initiative actually. It's the only way to ensure sustainable results and sustainability of the work. We were thrilled to see at our joint workshop in Nairobi in 2019, not only how many young researchers participated, but also what they say. They had a very clear message for us, and I quote one of them: "We don't just want funding, we want to have a voice in how the work is conducted." And this will make this a very impactful initiative. Sean, before we end, would you like to tell the audience how they can learn more about this initiative?
I feel exactly like in the news broadcast over here or a radio show. I think that you can visit the website AI4D.ai and the AI4D COVID website also, which is Global South.Watch. And as we are in social media world, follow us on Twitter at AI4Dev in English and IA4D souligné Afrique en français. There you can learn how to engage with the initiative, including scholarship, funding opportunities, and news about project. So that concludes my part and our broadcast today to you for this opening that is very virtual, but is also very warmly sent to all of you participants. On behalf of my colleague at IDRC, on behalf of our Board of Governors also, I want to thank you for your interest and look forward to the panel discussion. And very importantly, I want to thank you, Karen, as well as Swedish SIDA and all its personnel for the strong support in the co-creation of these two programs, AI4D and AI COVID. Oh my God. It's a mouthful for French
Yeah,
Canadian on the Monday morning.
it's a mouthful for Swedish as well, so I'll make it the simple way. I say, on behalf of SIDA, thank you very, very much for an excellent cooperation. And we wish you a vibrant discussion today and looking forward to the continued cooperation with you. Thank you very much.
Back to you, Matthew.
Thank you, Jean, and thank you both, Karen and Jean, for that very interesting conversation and overview of the AI4D initiative. Let me take this opportunity to express our appreciation for all the support that you both have given to this important work. By the way, for those who are interested, I put a link to the Nature article on AI and Sustainable Development Goals that John referenced in his comments in the messaging section. So moving right along, our next speaker is Petrarca Karechi, the head of the UN Global Pulse Lab in Jakarta. Petrarca will provide some short remarks on the potential of AI in the fight against COVID-19. Petrarca, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Matthew. It's just fascinated to hear both Karen and Sean's perspectives just then. So good morning, I guess, for those of you from a very warm and humid Jakarta environment. I just want to say first, congratulations on the launch of the Artificial Intelligence for Development Initiative. As Matthew said, my name is Petrarca Karechi, or just Petra, and I head the team of Pulse Lab Jakarta, which was established in 2012 initially as a data innovation lab, and which is part of the United Nations Global Pulse Network. Ladies and gentlemen, I see the rising number of cases and fatalities throughout the Global South and the immense impact of the COVID-19 pandemic that particularly highlights those who are vulnerable and marginalized and how they have been affected. The risk COVID-19 has is placing on undoing decades of development and humanitarian work. And this further emphasizes the need to support effective government responses and pilot new approaches. This includes the need to foster Southern leadership in the use of evidence-based AI and data to support multidisciplinary research on artificial intelligence for COVID-19 policy and decision-making and for user-centric data innovation. And I feel also that this is particularly important to be undertaken from a South perspective based on a contextual understanding of the issues and how that can bias or impact on the various algorithms and various perspectives in developing solutions to combat COVID-19 and other policies. As such, it's a real privilege for Pulse Lab Jakarta to be part of this global effort alongside IDRC and SIDA, and with the Global South AI for COVID program covering work in 18 nations across Africa, South America, and Asia. We are very excited to see the global networks that are also forming. So we look forward to playing a critical support role as an analytic partnerships accelerator to help strengthen these South-South linkages. So just again, my sincere congratulations, particularly to IDRC and SIDA, for your foresight and clear intent to engage South institutions. I look forward to working together with you all to further the impact of this initiative. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Petra. I know it's getting late there in Jakarta, so we are especially grateful for the effort you have made to speak with us today. And I must say, we are also, as IDRC and of course SIDA, very pleased and fortunate to be able to collaborate with the Pulse Lab on this initiative. So thank you. Bon, alors, sans perdre plus de temps, nous passons à notre panel.
Without further ado, I'd like to go to our panel that we're looking forward to. We will keep the question till the end of the discussion if we have some time left, but please do not hesitate to write your question in the message. Now I'd like to introduce Dominique Chanty, who is the Vice President at DCRD. Dominique, the floor is yours. Can you hear me?
To be here today to join with all of you, Matt, and all of you on our virtual audience to participate in the launch of this great partnership. And thank you to Jean and Karine for that great scene setting for the collaboration between our two agencies. Now, it's important and it's a really exciting day for me personally to finally meet these wonderful colleagues from Sweden, even though it's virtual, and also to meet these excellent and brilliant researchers that will be joining us for the panel. At the heart of our vision for artificial intelligence for development is the idea of a responsible artificial intelligence, or AI, which is inclusive, rights-based, ethical, and sustainable. AI technologies present a massive opportunity, I'm sure you'll agree, as a general purpose technology for new kinds of innovations, efficiencies, and foresight that can advance the Sustainable Development Goals and move us towards a more inclusive and sustainable world. Today, we'll be talking about inclusive and feminist AI, and we'll be having some presentations from the panelists I'll introduce in a moment, followed by a discussion. Now, it wouldn't be a complete intro if I didn't mention the pandemic and COVID-19. We know and are increasingly seeing the evidence that COVID-19 is resulting in a backsliding in a number of development goals, but in particular, of interest to us today, gender equality around the world. Women are more often in precarious employment in sectors most affected by lockdowns. Women are the majority in frontline health work, particularly in jobs at highest risk of exposure to COVID-19, and women have increased care responsibilities for children and relatives due to disruptions in schools, workplaces, and health services. And these are compounding to make the impact of the pandemic quite hard on women around the world, and particularly in developing regions. And unfortunately, we know that women everywhere are facing increased gender-based violence at this time. So in our pandemic recovery efforts, as AI applications are integrated into systems that impact people's everyday lives, it's important that research improve how technology can be more inclusive of women and other marginalized groups and create a safe and productive environment for them online. A growing body of research highlights how some algorithms and automated decision-making systems are affected by gender and other biases, and foundational data sets that are used by scientists to train everything from recommendation systems to language translators have these biases, and that makes them less useful in developing regions and to some of the people we are aiming to help. And this points out the need for research. And particularly if these automated systems are used for decision-making, then not only may they perpetuate inequalities, they can risk amplifying inequalities. So researchers around the world, and increasingly in Africa and developing regions, are using new methodologies and approaches to support the technical, political, and social thinking that's needed to address these challenges. And this panel, I'm happy to introduce, will be getting at these issues today. So I'm joined by Kathleen Siminyu. She's an AI researcher who is the coordinator of the AI4D network in Africa. And she builds, the network builds a community across the continent, including the Nairobi Women in Machine Learning and Data Science community, as well as with deep learning in Daba. Her own research involves natural language and speech processing for African languages, as well as low-cost hardware robotics. Welcome, Kathleen. Next, Renata Avila is an international human rights lawyer and author with more than 15 years of experience working in cutting-edge issues related to technology and society. She co-founded the A+ Alliance for Inclusive Algorithms. Welcome, Renata. Next, Joyce Nakatumba Navende is the head of AI Lab and a lecturer in the computer science department at Makerere University in Uganda, where she focuses on using AI to help improve livelihoods of smallholder farmers, particularly on issues affecting women farmers. Thanks for joining us, Joyce. Next, Araba Say is a principal researcher principal researcher with Research ICT Africa and a senior research scientist at the University of Washington Information School. Her research examines the relationship between digital and social inequality. So welcome, Araba. And lastly, but certainly not least, Nima Ayer is an artist and technologist. She is the founder and director of Policy, a civic technology organization based in Kampala, Uganda. Policy uses data, design, and technology to improve how citizens and government engage around public service delivery. Nima, great to have you with us today. Now, I encourage our online audience to share related questions, as Matt mentioned earlier, or comments or your links to your work in the chat. I'll try to incorporate some of your questions in the discussion. And thanks to Katie Clancy working in the background who will help me see those. Panelists, welcome. And I'll just ask you to please keep your answers short so that we have time for discussion and some questions, to integrate some questions from the audience. And I'll just jump in at about 4.5 minutes to keep things on track, if that's okay with you. So let's get going. I'd like to start with Kathleen. Kathleen Simonu, you are supporting a lot of capacity building efforts. Why does taking an inclusive approach to AI matter in the African context? What are some of the challenges and opportunities you are seeing through these efforts?
For the question, Dominique. I'll just go ahead and quickly share my presentation, which attempts to, in 5 minutes or less, take us through this response. Do you see my slides yet?
Not yet. There we go. Now we see.
Okay. So with my do you hear me?
We do. There's
Hello?
a bit of a lag, but we hear you.
Okay. Through my presentation, I wish to propose community-driven AI as a feminist research methodology for ethical and inclusive systems. I'm going to skip this slide because I think you did a great job of the introduction. And just to, by way of context setting, in a world where AI is increasingly making decisions previously made by humans, decisions about who to hire and who to fire, who gets a longer jail term and who gets parole, who gets a loan of how much and what does not, and who does not. We need to care about whether these systems are ethical and inclusive. So I also attempt to briefly define a feminist research methodology. So this refers to ways of doing research that are based on feminist principles and epistemological foundations. Feminist research seeks to address the growing distance between those who are designing and deploying AI systems and those who are affected by these systems. And some principles that I thought to high perspectives of women and other marginalized communities, and it embraces intersectionality, illuminating the multiple and intersecting ways that inequality and discrimination is experienced based on identities. So I also attempt to define AI4D, and through this I hope to co-opt your understanding of the fact that AI4D is actually a feminist research approach. So this is the development of AI solutions that center the experience of the marginalized, and or that brings into focus research problems that have previously received little attention because they largely affect only the marginalized, who are traditionally not included in the development cycle. So the recipe, or really the methodology, first is capacity building. Okay, and these are experiences that I'm going to say that are borrowed from a lot of the work that is ongoing on the continent, and some of this work having been supported by AI4D. So capacity building, which I see as the democratization of AI skills, begins to tackle the lack of diversity within the teams that are currently building AI systems. With this slide, I'm looking to highlight capacity building work taking place at different levels on the continent. There's the Women in Machine Learning and Data Science community, which I worked with particularly here in Nairobi for a number of years. That seeks to create a space exclusively for women, or particularly for women to explore AI. There are grassroots organizations such as the Deep Learning Indaba, Data Science Africa, which is the logo in the middle, and Data Science Nigeria, which are working in similar capacities to build capacity through organizing summer schools, bringing together researchers from across the continent annually, supporting local national events in different countries. And then there's also the Africa Masters in Machine Intelligence, which is a master's program designed in partnership with Google and Facebook, and is now offered at AIMS institutions in several countries in Africa. Moving into number 2, which is problem identification. I see this as beginning to tackle the lack of focus on research problems that have previously received little attention because they largely affect only the marginalized. And you will see through my examples that in some cases it has been accompanied by organizing challenges and specialized community capacity building. So one problem identified is a lack of data and computation resources for African languages. And this slide is from a poster session at an Indaba that was held in 2019, where we realized that there are very many individuals interested in, or rather building resources for the languages that they spoke and the languages that their communities spoke. And whereas it began with a focus on machine translation. Okay, so Masakane is what was birthed out of this interest. And it is a research effort for African languages that is open source, continent-wide, distributed, and online. Whereas it began with a focus on machine translation, it has now grown to include many other NLP tasks and plays a key role in mentoring junior researchers interested in NLP. And I'll discuss this a bit more in detail ahead in the presentation. Another problem that has been identified is a lack of research for discovery, development, and delivery of new tools for neglected diseases or diseases of poverty. And while these diseases affect millions of people globally, they also happen to be the world's poorest diseases, which is why they haven't received much attention. So the Indaba Grant Challenge, which is a program that the Deep Learning Indaba ran this year, has been curated for drug repurposing and drug discovery for leishmaniasis using AI techniques. And it's creating a platform for those interested in the intersection of AI and healthcare to engage. Then finally, I'm going to delve into funding mentorship opportunities and what that has catalyzed. So we run an AI4D mini grants program for part of, well, 2 iterations in the past 1.5 years, I'd say, where we put out a call for proposals for up to 8K. Through this program, we were looking to connect researchers with mentors who can provide feedback at various points of their research implementation process. We were able to award researchers working in healthcare, agriculture, language, conservation, just to name a few, and they are particularly tackling problems in their ecosystem. I list some of the projects that we have supported. And the last 2 in particular, I'd like to highlight because they're innovating with a keen sense of where they expect this work to deploy, which is in the African context where constraints such as power and connectivity are a reality. We have also run a language dataset fellowship, through which we put a challenge for creating African language datasets as a start, selected teams to participate in a fellowship, and then enable them to form interdisciplinary teams with linguists and translators for this work. I realize I'm out of time, beyond out of time at this point. So I'll finish with this slide where I'll say we also provided legal expertise for data protection, IP and copyright consultation, and various ways that researchers have been undertaking the task due to various ways that researchers have been taking the task creation, and also created 9 datasets, have several challenges running, and have developed guidelines for NLP researchers looking to create produced data sets as outputs. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kathleen. And we'll be coming back to you in the next round, so we'll be able to dive a bit deeper. Thanks very much. So now I'd like to pass the floor to Renata Avila. Renata, you've been engaging in feminist AI at a more global level, including coordinating with experts from around the world as part of the Feminist AI Research Network. Why does a feminist approach to AI matter in your view, and what are the opportunities to engage with Africa and beyond?
Hi, everybody. It's exciting to have a Central American here, and my vision is this is an unique opportunity to unbias AI for the future for the Global South. But not only that, by unbiasing AI, we will start beginning to realize a more systemic approach that we need to take. And it is important because is all these crises, not only the COVID crisis, but the economic and the inequality crisis that we are living and the violence against women crisis that we are going through in many countries in the Global South, had made us realize that systemic changes are needed. And the systemic changes that we need for the future need to be indeed people-centric, with all actors included. And that's what we are trying to do with this A+ Alliance. What we are trying is to break patterns of oppression, break patterns of exclusion. But not only that, what we want to propose and what is important is to, in this alliance, is to replace those systems with something better and design that something better together. And in having as principles of design, of course, gender equality, autonomy, and collaboration. And so, but why this woman is talking to an African audience? Let me explain the collaborative and the interregional nature of the work that we are doing. So I'm from this country, you know, Africa is here. I am right here. It's Guatemala. It's very, very, very small. And the reason why I'm particularly excited about sharing and listening what all of you have talked about today is that many of the things that you have shared, many of the realities and the challenges of the African continent are realities and challenges back home. And the problem now is we are like AI industry is a space of competition and is not a space of collaboration and shared practices. And it is a space designed to serve and satisfy the needs of the richest countries, to be honest, like the latest developments. And this opportunity, this that is being launched today, is a unique opportunity to nurture a space of collaboration and nurture a feminist space of co-creation. And that's what we are hoping to achieve. What we are hoping to achieve is to these biases replicated and amplified in AI to make them history and to transform the process, not only the process of coding, you know, not only the process of deploying, but starting by the decision process when we decide to implement one of these systems. Who says that what we needed? Who is designing it? And who is responding to it? And our level of work, it starts with the local, with community leaders, asking them, do you need this system? How do you want the system? Which are the risks that you identify if we make this automated? There's a lot of opportunities in all these 4 years to listen to all the actors in our communities. But then to elevate this at the multilateral, at the regional and multilateral level, because we need to influence not only the national and local norms, we need to influence and transform global systems and global norms. It's about time that we take our space at the table and that the Global South and feminist Global South is listened to, and the suggestions are transformed into systems that benefit more countries than just our own. Another way of designing AI is possible. We had, with the support of IDRC, collected a wonderful directory. I invite you to check at aplusalliance.org with fantastic experts from all over the world who can guide you in this journey. And we just want to just list the 3 secret ingredients to make it happen. We want AI systems with accountability, with coded inclusion, and with cooperation, which is the magic formula of this initiative being launched today. So why Africa? Africa is a global leader in setting very, very good standards for gender equality and inclusion in the Global South. Cases like Rwanda, all the efforts that all of you are doing locally in your communities and in your research communities, why don't I think that it's about time that Africa takes the challenge and becomes the leader of developing the AI, the inclusive AI and the feminist AI standards for the future. That's my hope today. That's my hope to inspire you today. And I hope that the transformative power of AI is also a transformative power of our systems and democracies for a better world.
Thanks very much, Renata Avila. Now, inspiring and exciting sort of ambition for Africa to lead us in gender equality and AI. So I am delighted to move now to Joyce Nakatumba Nabande. Joyce, your lab is focusing a lot on machine learning in a variety of contexts, including agriculture, education, and language. Can we talk a bit more about algorithmic debiasing and innovation? How do you bring this into your work?
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Very good. It's perfect. Thanks.
Okay. Can you see my screen as well?
Not yet, but perhaps it's coming.
Is it there now?
Not yet.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll just keep talking. Hopefully that this can be sorted out eventually. Just give me a minute.
There we go.
It's okay now?
Yes,
okay,
perfect. Over to you.
Yeah, so thank you. So as you have mentioned, a lot of the work we're doing in the lab is around building AI models for solving problems in the developing world. So the way I think about this is trying to think about the whole life cycle, right from the data and thinking about the whole spectrum to the algorithms and moving back to deployment. So what comes to me is that technology is everywhere, it's surrounding us, and many countries in Sub-Saharan Africa are also picking up on AI technologies. So when I think about the feminist AI agenda, I'm thinking about putting AI technology in the hands of the people who are actually going to make the tools or develop the models, the researchers, the learners, and making sure that this is very accessible for everyone, and also trying to do this in a participatory approach, right from the design to the data collection to the technology development and to the deployment of these modules. So why this is important to us is because in developing countries, we're seeing a lot of approach in using ML models and automated decision-making systems being adopted. But it shouldn't just be about importing the latest state-of-the-art machine learning systems and AI. The focus should really be on the more important aspects around the research on the data, the technology, and the people. And this is very important because it helps to support the diversity and inclusiveness in society when trying to use these models from the ground up. So there should be a very inclusive approach in trying to build up these models and focusing on making sure that if we have to come up and build very good AI models, that we do it especially coming from a data perspective, because we want to make sure we have diversity in the data that's being collected. That's because if we don't take care of such aspects during the data collection, this will affect the models that we are trying to develop. So how have we tried to do this in the AI lab is that we try to do our research in a very inclusive manner while building up our end-to-end AI systems. And what this means is that when we have a problem that we want to solve with an AI technology, this problem always comes from the community. So these are very involved as we build up these models. And eventually, when the models are being developed in the lab, they are sent back and deployed to the community that actually needs them. And we have this end-to-end approach in building of our AI systems. And we have done this in a very diverse manner across different domains. For example, in health, We have tried to build up diagnostic models for microscopic diseases around malaria, tuberculosis. We've also just recently been one of the grantees for AI in the Global South program, where we are trying to build AI and data systems for targeted surveillance and management of COVID-19 in Uganda. So this is very important because we've been given the opportunity to go from the ground up, start with the data, collect the data, build the systems, but not only just build the systems, but also have the link with the policymakers, that's the government and the Ministry of Health, in trying to help them combat the COVID-19 pandemic with the AI models and systems that we are grooming and growing out of the AI lab at Makerere University. In agriculture, we've done a lot of work around crop disease surveillance and diagnostic models, especially working with the smallholder farmers. And this has really been very inclusive. We haven't just focused on only the men, but we take it to make sure that it's inclusive for everyone, including the women, and trying to empower them with mobile phones that have AI tools that can help them in crop disease diagnosis, which has been done around cassava, beans, and maize. And we not only just give them a tool to go and identify a disease in the field, but we also close the gap with the agricultural experts by ensuring that there's proper feedback and recommendation from the experts that we closely work with to try and solve the problem, to help them to get to that last mile after diagnosis, then what happens. And so we try and close that gap as much as possible. Also in languages, we have been fortunate to be part of the AI4D fellowship, where we are driving efforts around building language resources for text and speech for Ugandan languages. So we try and build up our database our data set in a very exclusive and try and focus on as much inclusiveness as possible in building up this data set. We make sure it's as open as possible, and we're using platforms like the Mozilla Common Voice, which we recently launched, to try and build the data set, because we are also ensuring that there's inclusiveness, that we don't just preach these things, but we also try and do them as we try and build up the data sets around the different efforts that we're doing in the lab. We also very much focus around using responsible AI approaches in our algorithms. And that's the reason why I said we will not just import the state-of-the-art algorithms or systems and deploy them. No, we try and make sure that the systems that we are building from the ground up are ethical, are transparent, and accountable as we try and use the AI. We are also going the step further to try and understand what's the impact of the AI technologies that we are building for the diverse underserved group. For example, if we are thinking about our smallholder farmers, we really have to go and assess the impact. What do the communities think about the AI systems that we are giving them and that we are deploying? And finally, we have part of the work that we are doing, of course, is the Open for Good initiative, which we recently launched, that focuses on the data on inclusive AI commons with localized data. And also the other work in the lab is around trying to focus on open and unbiased AI training videos, where we are trying to close the gap from data collection to building the models, ensuring that all these things around bias are taken care of, but empowering the African continent with relevant material that they need to be able to do this work. And as we are building our models, the question that was posed was around the algorithm. So it's very important that we focus on the AI and model governance frameworks as we build up these AI models. To what extent are the AI systems being designed and operated to reflect the human values around fairness, accountability, transparency, while avoiding biases and inequalities? So each of the AI systems that we build out of the lab always have to undergo this AI and model governance framework, such that these things are taken care of along the life cycle. And gladly, we are part of the AI feminist group that helps to advance the feminist agenda using AI. Yeah,
Thanks
thank you
so much. And sorry to jump in like that, Araba, but we will be coming back to this, I hope, in a few minutes. So I'll now turn to where am I in my things here? That was Joyce. Now I'm turning to Araba. Am I turning to Araba? No, that was Araba. No, there you are.
No, you're turning to me.
There we go. Sorry about that. Thank you, Joyce Nakatumba Nabende from Uganda. And now I am turning to Araba Say. Araba, your work with Research ICT Africa, you've been focusing on policy research and research that integrates feminist perspectives. So tell me about these policy perspectives and the case studies that you've been working with that underscore these inclusive approaches to AI and digital technologies. Over to you.
Thank you. Is my screen coming up? Do you see my screen?
Sorry, my mute was lagging. Yes, perfectly.
Yes.
Thank you, that's perfect.
Okay.
But now we see it.
Now it's
perfect.
Yeah, okay. I think it's back now. Great. Yeah, I feel like my colleagues have covered so much ground, but I'm going to share some thoughts at maybe a little bit of a high level, starting with the fact that there are a lot of things that I expect to see in feminist AI in Africa, but I'll just mention 3 of them, which is one, that it should have a strong socioeconomic development agenda grounded in African realities. Secondly, it should be smart in the sense of having the ability to recognize and serve diverse groups, and especially the already underserved, according to their respective needs. It should also, importantly, seek to avoid the mistakes with past technologies that showed great promise but have so far failed to deliver on both digital and social inequality. To try and avoid or at least preempt these past errors, feminist AI in Africa would be approached from a socio-technical systems perspective, taking into account not only the potential benefits of AI, which one could say are quite self-evident, but also considering issues of readiness, local and global governance structures and capabilities, existing and potential social inequalities, potential risks and harms, and human rights, the human rights implications of AI and automated decision-making processes. And so it's a complex set of issues that need to be taken into consideration, but without that, we're going to end up essentially with more of the same, with new technologies leading to perhaps a little bit of expansion in access, but more likely deepening absolute inequality or relative inequality. So as with previous technologies, the direct benefits of artificial intelligence will in all likelihood be aspirational for most populations for a long time. And I think notwithstanding all the advancements that are being made, we need to acknowledge that it's going to be really far away from a lot of people for a long time to come. So it's important to consider how AI systems could be designed to meet people where they are and relate to communities in the context of their current realities. And so for this reason, one of the things that Research ICT Africa is exploring is the concept of smart townships and smart villages. So most of us have probably encountered ideas around smart cities. Some would say they are overhyped, some would say that they really hold a lot of promise, driven by artificial intelligence, by data to really serve the needs of communities. However, it does appear that in the developing country context, the smart cities idea doesn't really take. So we're thinking about looking at, and this is because it tends to focus on urban centers and issues of high efficiency and serving the needs of people who already tend to be already well served by other technologies. So the concept of smart townships, if done properly, would leverage technology for local development and resilience. And in this
process, what it would do is pivot away from the focus on private sector and usually foreign investment, which tends to, as I said, prioritize the interest of commercial entities and the already well-served urban centers, and move towards models of local capital distribution that delivers the services that local communities, and again, especially the rural and urban poor, want and need. Crucially, this approach would embrace informality as a valid mode of existence and economic activity, which has benefits, useful benefits such as flexibility. And it would seek to enhance livelihoods in that state rather than explicitly trying to impose formality on all settlements and activities. So taking this more user-centric perspective from the outset, we feel would help to counter the economic and technological determinism that tends to be associated or embedded in the smart cities narrative. However, this will require creative configurations of public and private sector resources and capabilities at all levels, local, national, regional, and global. Research by my colleagues at Research ICT Africa has shown that the smart township initiatives are just as prone to failure as smart cities programs if they are not accompanied by adequate financial resources and political commitment in the context of a national development strategy. So bringing the combined power of artificial intelligence and intersectional feminism ideals to bear on urbanization and rural development decision-making processes could contribute to reshaping the way such programs are designed for more equitable distribution of resources. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Araba. And really, I think interesting and exciting to think about this concept of smart cities, which is certainly seized with some of the higher income countries, but we're seeing also that it's a phenomenon everywhere. There are real opportunities, I think, here for our discussion to come back to this as well. We're going to have to be efficient, though. I'll turn now to Nima Ayer. Nima, you've been working at the interface between technology and rights for quite some time. Can you tell us a bit more about the work you've been doing and some of these approaches that you think can help propel change?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Can you see my slides?
We can.
Awesome, great. So I know that all the other participants and John, we've talked about many of the issues that I'm going to discuss, but I think it's still worthwhile to dive into it. So at Policy, we wanted to first ask the question, what is the online experience like for women living across Africa? Because that was the fundamental question we wanted to know before we start moving to build these different kinds of systems. So we did a research project across 5 countries in Africa from east, west, south to figure out how do women experience digital spaces. And what we found out was that 1 in 3 women across these 5 countries of Ethiopia, Kenya, Senegal, South Africa, and Uganda had experienced some form of online violence. And what we found more worrying was that based on these experiences, a number of women, so about 1/4 of the women who had experienced this violence had deleted or deactivated their accounts, and another 16% had stopped using these services altogether, which we found very problematic because if you're trying to build a digital future that is inclusive, but you're seeing that women are actually leaving digital spaces and stopping the use of online services, then we have a big problem there. And so this is from where we are starting in terms of, what does our digital future look like? So yeah, what is an Afrofeminist AI? What do we need to get there? And basically I have 4 main points, which the first one is that we need to set our own agendas. So we know that data is created, it's processed, it's interpreted under unequal power relations. And basically who decides what gets counted, right? That's the important question. And if you have corporations who are deciding to collect your data so that they can get more revenue from you, is that really the model that we need to go with? So we really need to ask these kinds of questions. So what kind of data sets are being produced? What are the priority areas that are being picked? Who is driving the kind of discourse that you want to move forward? So from a feminist perspective, you really want to consider multiple forms of knowledge. Like, who has the knowledge that you want? Is it people coming from abroad? Is it people who live there and really get the context? And it's already been said many times just in the past hour, good AI needs good data. And when you think about how this data is collected, you really need to think about the ethics and care. And so when I say setting our own agendas, this is how we want to really focus on feminist research that Kathleen also mentioned. The second one is setting our own governance structures, which is a bit of what Araba had just mentioned, and basically thinking of like, what are different models of economic power? How can we come together to cooperate and in solidarity? Because what you're seeing is a lot of, the gig and shared economy, which are very exploitative. You see startup culture, which is very capitalist. It's focused on profits. There's, hyper individualism, but that's not really what African feminism is about. But that is how platforms are developed these days, where that is appreciated. So it's really about coming together to think about, if we want this to be our digital AI future, what does that governance structure look like? The third one is setting our own limits. So what will we accept and what will we not? Do we have the right to refuse these kinds of services? Do we have the right to remain anonymous? And I really like this quote that says, for most of history, anonymous was a woman. And there's different reasons for that, of course, but when we develop these kinds of platforms, do we have these ethics of care, like consent? Is the consent continuous? Is it ongoing? Can we take it away? Can we understand what we are signing off to when we agree to the terms and conditions? So it's very much about us setting what we will and will not accept. The fourth one is setting our own criteria. So can we imagine a future which is more open source, which is transparent? Do we know what is the logic behind these algorithms? Is it secure? Is it built with our security in mind? Does it take into account our local context, our local languages? Of course, there's work being done on that, but there's so much more that we really need to do. And we need to ask these questions of who really owns the data, who controls it, what is being done with it? Do we have the right to memory? So if we want to withdraw our information, is that allowed? So not just consent, but also this concept of memory, because as you know, the internet never forgets. So who audits these platforms for fairness? How is that done? We basically have to take charge and set our own criteria. And just to end, what we're doing in this space. So of course, we first did this research to understand what's it like in digital spaces for African women. Now we're working on a larger Pan-African research, which is looking at how do feminist movements across Africa, whether you're an individual activist or you're a well-funded organization, how are you using data in your feminist movements? We're also exploring the role of AI on disinformation as it impacts women's political campaigns. For example, in Uganda right now, we have the scientific elections, which are supposed to be done mainly using traditional or social media. So what does that look like if now women are campaigning in online spaces? And we know that a lot of online violence excludes women from these spaces, and it makes it more difficult for them to really set their agendas when you're dealing with things like deep fakes and misinformation. And the third one we're doing is mapping the role and impact on foreign technology companies on marginalized communities. So just thinking about the connection between like fintech and biometric IDs and how that impacts people living on the margins. So again, thank you for having me. I will stop sharing now.
Thanks so much, Nima Ayer, for that. It's a great way, I think, to bring the conversation to our discussion point. Now, we only have about 10 minutes left, and we have 2 questions from the audience. So what I'll do is I'll relay the questions and then ask you each, perhaps in essentially 2 minutes or less, to come in with any additional point you'd like to make. And if it addresses the questions from the audience, so much the better. On a une question au sujet de l'Afrique francophone. We have a question particular and what the participation of those regions are in your experience, and certainly the language barrier, which you may want to speak to, and that was from Tamambao. And then we also have a question about the going beyond the sort of capacity building, or in the context of capacity building for feminist approaches. what are we doing in terms of research clusters or internship opportunities that are career building for women? So I'll just put that out there as the questions that are the most interest of the well, not the most interest, but the questions that have been posed to us from the audience. And maybe just go, how about I go first to Joyce? And Joyce, we had talked a little bit about coming back to urgent obstacles. So clearly these language barriers are among those, but I'll just turn it over to you for maybe a minute in a bit on obstacles or the questions from the audience.
Okay, thank you. So I feel like the obstacles that limit these approaches, one is really about the capacity and the skills. And I think that also answers the second question around the internship opportunities and the career building for women. So I feel that's always like the gap that we even experience here at the university. So we try as much as possible, and that's something that we all have to do together to provide these opportunities, to build capacity, to provide internship, to provide mentorship for women. And I know that Masakani, as Catherine mentioned, is doing that a lot for NLP, and that's a space which has really provided and enabled people to grow. So we're also trying to do as much as we can in the AI lab to provide the capacity, and not only the capacity, provide them with the tools to get them started. So you give them the data. With amassed lots of data that we've collected in the lab. So we start by providing the space with the data and the guidance and the mentorship so they can begin on the journey as they go along to get there.
Oh, I'm the one with the lag. Thanks very much, Joyce. And Araba, you know, we've understood from your presentation as well that there's a really important social dimension here, that these aren't necessarily technological obstacles. Do you want to come in on that?
Absolutely. I think.
Oh, we can't hear you. There we
go. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
I think
perfect.
the social layer to me is really critical in multiple, you know, eras of technology. We have been dealing with the same issues. I mean, this is not the first time we are talking about gender and digital divides and so on. And so the question I keep asking myself is, why are we still where we are? We know what we need to do to solve the problems, but we don't. And so I think paying some attention to the social layer is really critical to get at the foundations of gender inequality, right? Because that is what then pervades everything else. I like to think of it as we tend to approach new technologies with the expectation that digital inclusion will lead to social inclusion. And I would like to argue that perhaps if we start thinking about it as social inclusion leading to or facilitating digital inclusion, we might find ourselves allocating the resources to address these problems in slightly different ways. Not to say that it can't happen the other way around, but we've been trying that for a while. I think maybe it's time to think about doing things a little bit differently from the social layer as well, not just from the technological layer. And one of the ways that I think that might happen is engaging with the conversations around new masculinities. I think it's important, really important, to bring men more strongly into the conversation and to talk not just about what it means to be a woman, but what it means to be a man in this world and how we can then sort of coexist in ways that are mutually sort of beneficial to everyone. So I'll leave it there and maybe hopefully have a chance to make more remarks later.
Oh, thanks, Araba. And I think well, we're just scratching the surface, and I think we'll have to have a rematch because we're going to be running out of time shortly to come back to all of you. But I did want to go to Kathleen for a moment, particularly on the West Africa, Central Africa, and language issues. Have you come across, you know, the particular dimension of Francophone Africa challenges in engaging with AI in your work?
So to that, I'll say that right from the outset of our activities, we realized that there is, I would call it an artificial barrier between Francophone and Anglophone Africa. And through consultations with researchers and practitioners from both groups, we came to the conclusion and understanding that it was preferred that, for example, the AI4D program should be one unified program as opposed to being viewed separately due to the different nature of the environment. So I will say that right from the outset, with all the activities that we have run, whether it's been assessing proposals for funding or even selecting the language fellows, beyond a bare minimum of what is required from a proposal, having shortlisted the top, say, 10 or 20 or 30, depending on how many we're looking to select, we then start taking into consideration other factors such as geographical diversity or even gender diversity, just to make sure that we're not only selecting the best of the best, but then from the best and those that can actually do impactful work, we're actually also paying attention to the other dynamics, which of course matter immensely.
Thanks, Kathleen. Now, Renata, where do you see sort of the opportunities for this new program that we're talking about today, to connecting this great innovation and action around inclusive AI to the global stage? Where are you seeing the opportunities to really connect?
It is, I see the highest opportunity, and it's personal opinion, not of the Alliance, and the public sector, actually. On the public sector and the if I was for one day, you know, like the chairperson of the African Union, I will like to hear from this initiative, and I will fully fund it and support it. And I think that that's the buyout we need to build. We need to build a buyout from the public sector, because it's when we can kind of disrupt a little bit the rules. And for example, I would, if I was pushing for political buy-in from countries in this program, I will advocate for a 50-50 programs, or even a 70-30 teams inside the public administration, building the technologies that Africa needs for the future. That will transform the game, because that will really open the doors for public interest AI for women, for the next generation of women, you know, for those who are starting their PhD now and will be like ready when this program comes to an end, to land a good job, you know, in the places where they are needed the most, instead of flying to Silicon Valley and applying their knowledge there. So that will be like my dream will be that. Reduce the economic barriers and the barriers of entry that industry has by opening an ecosystem, interdisciplinary ecosystem for the women in AI from Africa to work for the public sector and to public good. That's just wishful thinking.
Oh, it's inspiring, I think. And certainly we've heard from all of you really exciting, I think, work that's already been going on, and busting the myth that Africa is not engaged in this work, and that women are not engaged or in technology in Africa. But we also recognize from all of your interventions that there's still a long way to go. Nima, I'm going to come to you for the last intervention here before I turn to my colleague Alan Atkinson from CEDA for some closing remarks. But Nima, what happens if we don't get this right? What happens if we don't integrate women's considerations, and I wouldn't even say only women, but gender equality and inclusion in this rapid growth of AI?
Yeah, I think that there are a number of things that could go wrong, which you're already seeing happening in other contexts. And I think that countries across Africa are at a really good point where, you know, the AI systems are just approaching that we can actually, you know, say what we want and what we don't want. So I think that there is a need to have this discourse on a bigger level, for example. But I think that the issues that scare me, for example, are like the proliferation of surveillance. So basically marginalized groups, LGBTQ groups, religious minorities, any kinds of dissenting voices, any kinds of opposition to ruling parties. I think many of these people run the risk of AI being used for reasons that basically reinforce or amplify their oppression, that push forward censorship. I think there's also a real danger in terms of what kinds of data sets are being used and what kinds of harms could they have. For example, if you have, it's already discussed, if you have a health model and you use inappropriate data sets, how are you harming people who are supposed to receive these services? I think another thing that worries me is basically if a lot of these AI models are being imported from foreign countries, then are we forced to accept their laws and their customs and whatever colonial data structures that they have? And what does that say to our power and agency in determining what our future looks like? So I think there's like a number of problems, but in the interest of time, I'll just stick to those main ones.
Well, and I didn't want to end on problems, but I think at the same time, we can be really inspired and excited about the work that's already underway on the continent. And yet we need to be cognizant that there's a long way to go. And if the technology moves us forward without taking into consideration all of these aspects of inclusion, not only gender, but language, region, culture, then there's a risk of people being left behind, of the technologies not having the potential impact that they could have. I really want to thank you all. It's been fantastic, and I'm so disappointed that we don't have a whole other hour because there's so much to talk about. So I'm hoping that we will have a rematch as the program rolls out and another opportunity to engage with you and others on this. And what a way to start off our new initiative on artificial intelligence for development in Africa with our good friends from Sweden. So I'd like to invite Alan Atkinson now, who is the Assistant Director General and Director, Department of Partnership and Innovation from SIDA, to help wrap this up. Alan, over to you.
Oh my goodness, Dominique. J'étais tellement impressionné avec tous les présentateurs et présentations. C'était merveilleux.
I was greatly impressed with all the presentations. It was fantastic.
This panel was really extraordinary and inspiring, which I tweeted, by the way, in this world of digital media. So if anybody doesn't want their picture on my tweet because I took a screenshot, you should let me know and I'll take it down. But I got so excited listening to these important perspectives. And we at SIDA, of course, are very happy and very proud to be participating with you in this work. There are a few things I can't possibly try to summarize what we heard. I'll just pick up a few things that I'm very much taking with me. The very visionary picture of Africa actually being the leader on equality inclusiveness in this technology. I think that's something that that we share. I know, Dominique, we both share that we work for governments that have a feminist foreign policy. And as Arabo was saying, that means that it's not just about women leading, it's also about men stepping up and leading on feminism, and particularly in this space. So I'm very happy to hear that message being broadcast loud and clear, and we of course echo that from the Swedish side. But also just in general, I'm quite excited about the amount of innovation and energy and leadership that's already just in this short period of time being reflected and evidenced by this collaboration. And the scholarships and fellowships that our partnership finances, I believe, will be helping to generate and support the emergence of new talent to realize that vision that we've been hearing about. It's a very broad agenda that we're talking about. And as we all know, Africa is a very large continent, but that means it's also a very deep pool of talent just waiting to be empowered on these issues and working hard to be empowered. As Jean was talking about, it's already springing up in hundreds of places around the continent. That's what we've also been inspired by over at SIDA. So we're excited to participate and plan this agenda together, and we look forward to many more conversations like this one. And I look forward to continuing to learn as an amateur, but interested amateur, about how AI is developing and how its development can be steered in more human directions, not just AI that pretends to be human, but AI that actually is human and humane in the way that it's applied in the development context. So thanks so much for that, Dominique. And thanks to all of the speakers for really a fabulous time of learning.
Merci, Alan, et plaisir de vous écouter parler français.
Thank you, Alan. It was a pleasure to hear you speaking French. Good surprise.
Collaboration. Unfortunately, I cannot reciprocate in Swedish yet, but perhaps in a few years I will. As Jean Lebel and Karen Yampton stated, this partnership between CETA and IDRC has been underway for some time. We're very pleased, as Alan, you've also said, to put the resources in the hands of experts in Africa to catalyze this AI for a more inclusive and sustainable development. As we know, the SDGs are lagging in many countries in Africa, and there's a need to accelerate and innovate. And at the same time, there's a need to do that in a way that doesn't leave people behind. And we are so pleased, certainly today, to have these fantastic women with us to help show how to lead the way. And we are very excited to be moving ahead with a number of opportunities for research and engagement over the coming months through this new initiative, and mobilizing many innovators from across sub-Saharan Africa. And all of these opportunities will be posted on the AI4D.ai website and will be shared through CETA and IDRC's networks, of course. The agenda will continue to emerge and evolve. So we encourage people who are interested in this to stay connected with us and to subscribe to the bulletin. Donc, je vous remercie beaucoup de votre attention aujourd'hui. I'm sure you join me.
Thank you for your kind attention.
And thanks to our virtual audience for joining us today and for their questions and engagement. We really look forward to connecting again with you soon. Merci beaucoup. Thanks very much. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.